Hey guys, welcome back to the channel. This one's going to be a long one, so fair warning. This is part 2 of our hallway makeover / renovation. And there will be a part 3 because we are not quite done. This project just took so much longer than I thought it was going to take. I thought this video was going to be ready the same week that I posted part 1. Definitely not the case. So there will be a part 3 because we're not quite finished. We are far enough along that the hallway looks like it's done, but there's still a bunch of like little things that I want to add to it. I'll explain that as we get going through here. So my husband, my wonderful husband here, is helping me with this project because he is the brawn of this operation. I do not mess with the power tools in the garage. I am just not talented in that capacity. But thankfully, my husband is crazy handy. We have been married for 17 years, 16 years, something like that. We just had our 16th wedding anniversary in January. So it has been a crazy 16 years, and I'm very blessed to have him in my life. He's super, super helpful. So right now he is taking the baseboards and the trim off. When we very first moved into this house, I spoke about this in our last renovation project video. We signed our papers in 2019. We moved in 2021. The project, the build of our house took 18 months from start to finish. And it was crazy. Absolutely psycho crazy, because we signed our papers to build before the housing market in Florida went bonkers, and then our house was being built while the market was bonkers, and our builder was bonkers, and everything about building was bonkers. And if I had to do it all again, I definitely would not. I would just buy an already built house and gut it and do what I wanted to it. So I just, 0 out of 10 would not recommend building a home. The whole process was super stressful, super, it was bad. 0 out of 10. Also, I cannot stress this enough. If you are going to be building a new home, make absolutely, positively sure that you get a new home inspection. It will be the best $400 or $500 you will ever spend in your entire life. I will talk a little bit about that. Well, you know what? I'm just going to talk about it now because all we're doing is cleaning up the hallway here right now. And I do have this video on 2 or 3 times speed, and it is quite edited in terms of I have cut out a lot of dead time because this took multiple days, like you'll see. So anyhow, when we went right before we went to close, a friend of ours who built with the same builder in Florida discovered a bunch of problems with their home as they were moving in, and the builder wanted them to do a punch list, which is essentially, I don't know what it's called anywhere else, and I don't even know if I'm calling it the same thing, but a closing punch list where essentially the builder was going to leave a bunch of things undone, and then with the promise that they would come back and finish it later, just so that closing could happen before rates rose or anything like that. And do not do that. Do not do that. I can just say from experience that that same friend now 2 years later still has unfinished things in their home that did not get finished like the builder promised. So do not do that. Do not agree to close on an unfinished house or a house that you are unhappy with. Make the builder do the things. Make them stick up to their end of the contract. And also get yourself a realtor. Make sure that you have your own representation before going into a builder's model home or whatever. So you definitely need a realtor who's on your side. I cannot recommend that enough. We did not. We used the builder's realtor. It was a horrible process. And we ended up in the end having to go through a lawyer to get things fixed and finished. And like I said, it was a really, really stressful, awful process. 0 out of 10 would not recommend. But again, what I would recommend is making sure that you do a new home, a new build, a new construction. I'm not sure what they call it where you live, but make sure that you get a new construction home inspection, because most people don't know that, at least here where I'm at in Florida, the county and the city do not come to inspect your property as the build is being done. The builder hires people who don't live here, who, in our case, our builder was using people who lived in Panama City, a full 12 hours away. And, well, probably 10 hours away. But in our case, our builder was using an inspector, quote unquote, who was 10 hours away, who never came to the property. And so a lot of really critical structural things were not caught during the building process. However, they were caught in our new home inspection, including trusses that were cut in half. So our roof was structurally unsound. We had windows that were nailed into just the Tyvek paper. They weren't even framed. They were just sitting loosely stuccoed into the Tyvek paper. We had zero insulation in the house. Zero. The builder did not insulate the home at all. Zero. Among many, many other things. And so about 2 weeks before closing, we had this new home inspection done, and the builder was furious that we wanted to have this home inspection done, and they tried to talk us out of it, and we said absolutely not. And so we went through with it, and it was the best. I want to say it was like $450 when we did this. It was the best $450 we ever spent in our whole lives, because the inspectors were super thorough. They were ones that we hired, and they had no affiliation with the builder at all. And they found 40, I'm not kidding, we had 47 pages of things that needed to be fixed before we could move in, and including mold. We had to do mold remediation less than a month after we moved into our brand new build. So that is how important a new home inspection is. I cannot stress this enough. Anyhow, I say all that to say that the process was super stressful, and because of everything that happened, I just felt super disheartened when we moved in. I was already really stressed about buying a house. We had waited for so long. People sometimes come over and they like think that we're wealthy or something because we have a very nice house. It's big, it's on some land. But what they don't see is the 16-year, well, at that time, 15-year process that we waited and waited and waited and waited and waited and rented like literal crack homes sometimes to be able to afford to buy land and then pay that all off, and then to be able to put a down payment down and pay that all off and everything. So I want to encourage anybody who is watching and feels like, oh, I don't have that pretty of a place or whatever. This is not our first rodeo. We actually built a house several years ago, and we walked away from it at closing because the builder was doing shady things, and we ended up having to hire a lawyer to take care of all of that. And it all worked out in our favor, but this was just not our first rodeo. And so we weren't shocked going in that the builder was shady, but we were disappointed. And so because we had waited for so long, because we, took our time, and we made a lot of very careful decisions surrounding building and finishes and what we did and didn't want to spend money on, that kind of thing. We started with rentals and living very far below our means, and now we're here. And I think sometimes people come into our space and they assume that this is like where we started, but this isn't. This is not where we started. This is a lifetime. Like it's literally 15 years of work, the culmination of 15 years of work. So I don't want anybody to get discouraged by saying, oh, my space isn't that big or pretty or new or anything like that. Just start where you are. Start today. Start where God has placed you. Do the next thing that he has put in front of you, and start wherever you are. Start taking dominion right there. Start subduing right there. Start glorifying right there. Because when you keep your hand to the wheel, when you keep your nose to the grindstone, eventually you get there. And even if you don't, it's good, because it's all for your good and God's glory. And it's stressful. The process is stressful. So what my husband and son are doing here is installing that new door casing. So remember, I told you in the last video that the door framing was really ornate and round, and it did not fit the Craftsman interior space that we had gone for. Also, I think that he has reinstalled the baseboards here, or at least put them back up. So what my husband had to do was take the baseboards and the new door casing and put a router bit to the top of them, because we decided on board and batten. But I didn't want to attach the board and batten straight to the wall, for a couple different reasons, but mostly just for aesthetics. Just in case I didn't like it, or just in case it looks old or gets dated and I want to change it, I wanted the option to uninstall it without damaging the drywall too severely behind it. So I didn't want to punch a bunch of holes in the drywall with nails, or have to put like a ton of glue on the back of the MDF that we're putting onto the walls here. We did still end up having to use some liquid nails, which you'll see in a little bit. But all my husband's doing here is just reinstalling the same baseboards that we had. When we bought the house, we had rolled linoleum and carpet put down, and it saved us so much money to have the builder just put down rolled linoleum. And we even asked them not to glue it down. We expected them to glue it because they literally did not listen to any of our other requests. But for whatever reason, the floor installer that day, I was on site literally every day. I was there because our site supervisor wasn't ever here. He had no idea what was going on, so he was constantly calling me to figure out what was going on. And so anyways, I happened to be here the day that the carpet and linoleum installer was here, and I just asked him very nicely to please not glue the linoleum down, and he looked at me like a crazy person when he was pulling rolled linoleum off his truck and bringing it into this huge house. And I was just like, listen, we're going to tear it up immediately. You don't even have to put the tack strips down for the carpet. You don't have to do transitions. Nothing. You don't have to do anything. You don't even have to glue the baseboards or caulk them or anything, because we're taking it all out the day we move in. And he thought I was crazy, but he didn't glue the linoleum down, so praise the Lord for that. So we moved in and we immediately ripped the carpet and linoleum out, and then we installed our own LVP, and that process took maybe about a week to do the whole house. Or to do the whole living areas of the house. It took us a while longer to get to the upstairs. We still haven't finished the steps, but that's a huge project. So fast forward in time here, and my husband has taken those MDF boards and cut out the outlet boxes in them, and he also expanded the outlet box there on the hallway. We have a gym right there, which is the doorway that you can see into, and there are no outlets for the gym for lights on the outside of the doors, and the doors swing inward. So in order to turn the lights on in the gym, you have to go into the gym, close the doors, and then you can get behind the door to get to the switch. And it's such a stupid design. So dumb. I don't understand it. But thank the Lord, my husband is very handy, and he was able to rewire the switches so that now we can turn on the gym light from the hallway instead of having to go into the dark gym, close the door, and make it even darker. And yeah, just silly. It was a silly, silly design. The gym is also a work in progress. Honestly, every single room in the house is a work in progress except for the master bathroom. That is basically the room that got completely finished first. And we're not even sure that we're completely finished it because we think we might be installing a second shower head at some point in the future. You're going to see me doing a bunch of chores here. I was just sanitizing some cutting boards and sticking them in the oven to dry. And here my husband is measuring and marking the tops of the baseboards to see where those MDF panels are best going to slide into. So I think I explained earlier that he cut a notch using the router all the way around the top of those baseboards so that the MDF could just kind of slot down into that notch and be held in place there versus having it have to be held in place with nails. And that actually did work pretty well. So I am going to be staining some boards here, and I don't know if in this video you'll actually see what these are going to be used for, but I was attempting to match them to the floor as best as I could. And the floor is from LL Flooring. We have a Lumber Liquidators. We have a couple of them in town. If you are looking for really good priced flooring, I highly suggest checking out LL Flooring. The process for us was super simple. Of course, I'm not like sponsored or anything. I just would recommend them because of how easy the process was for us. So I just went in there, I bought the floors. We saved, I'm not kidding, $25,000 or $35,000 doing it this way. The builder, I want to say, quoted us like $38,000 or $40,000 for LVP throughout the whole house, which is what we wanted. And we wouldn't get to choose the color that we wanted. We would get to choose from what they had on hand. And I wasn't real happy with anything that they had on hand. And that kind of their LVP that they had was really thin and really cheap. And I had experience installing vinyl flooring myself because I helped my parents install their vinyl floors. I'm sorry, bless me. So anyways, I helped my parents install their vinyl floors, and it was not a difficult process. My parents actually had wood plank floors, engineered wood, but we are in Florida, and it's humid here. And so when it's humid, engineered wood floor is not a big fan of that. So we do have an air conditioner, of course, but if in the event that we lose power or it goes out, or we experience a flood or spills, and we also have pets, there's children here all the time and we're hosting stuff. I wanted something that was way more durable than engineered wood flooring. So we went with LVP, and LL Flooring had the best selection for higher end engineered flooring, like thicker. I'm not talking about brands because I don't think brands are that important, but I do think the thickness and the wear layer thickness are really important. We did a ton of research before deciding to go with LVP because initially I thought I had wanted tile, but then we just decided against it. LVP was much more affordable, and the print that we chose looks pretty realistic. I really appreciate having no grout. We have dealt with tile floors in Florida for 15 years, and cleaning grout is a nightmare. There is no great way to do it. I end up doing it on my hands and knees with bleach and a toothbrush, and I hated it. So I definitely did not want any grout to have to clean in this house, and so we went with LVP. So I was attempting to match these wood planks here, which will be top caps and shelves that rest on top of the board and batten. I was attempting to match these to the color of the floor. And that was pretty difficult because the floor is weathered oak, or no, it's called river walk oak. And it's kind of this great mix between gray, brown, yellow, beige. It's even got a little bit of blue in it, and it doesn't feel too in any direction. No matter, like, even if it's dark or if the sun's on it, it doesn't feel too warm. It doesn't feel too cold. It doesn't feel too hard. It doesn't feel too soft. It's just like this very perfect middle ground for all the different I don't know, colors that we could potentially have put on the walls or picked for furnishings. And I wasn't 100% sure what I was going to be doing in terms of paint. I knew the color that I was going to be putting on the walls. The paint color on the walls here is Passive by Sherwin-Williams. It's like a blue-gray. It leans more towards blue than it does gray. But I knew already that that was the paint that I was going to be putting as the base on all the walls throughout the house. But I didn't know beyond that. I knew that this was just going to be the paint once we moved in. And then I didn't know like what the house was going to look like after we started living in it. And I've said this before, I'm still not in any real hurry to finish any of the spaces. So some of our spaces look very plain, and that is fine. As we live in our space and use our space, I get a better feeling for how that space should be looking, because I want our spaces to reflect us, and I want it to reflect how we use the space. And I think if I just go out and I go to Hobby Lobby and I buy all the signs and whatever, and I try to like put them on the wall, it's gonna look like that's exactly what I did. Like I didn't put any thought or intention into how I want this space to feel. So for right now, very plain, not much going on, and that is fine with me. So I'm just staining this here with Minwax. I think Weathered Oak is the color that I went with, which was very gray. And the reason that I picked a very gray stain is because I was using very yellow pine boards. We just got these boards from Home Depot. They're 2x4s, I think. And they, my husband routed the one edge of these because you'll see how it's going to sit. But the bottom edge of these needed to be routed to have that notch in it so the MDF would sit behind it. So these boards sit on top of the MDF as basically a trim piece. And so in trying to match these boards to the floor as best as I could, I knew that the boards were going to be very yellow because they are pine. And so I needed to counteract that yellow to get it more to a gray beige. And I knew that a very dark gray would make that happen. So that's how we ended up with a very dark gray stain. Here we're installing the MDF boards. You can see my husband's just putting a little bit of liquid nails on the back of each of the boards. I was even kind of hesitant to do this step, and we did try to put the boards up without any liquid nails, and they were just kind of bowing and not sitting nicely in the little tracks that my husband put into the trim. So they really did need that little bit of extra sealant to stick against the wall. Also, I think this might have worked better if we didn't have, I have a satin no VOC paint on the walls. So it is Sherwin-Williams. It's their no VOC. I can't remember the name of the paint, but also we have textured walls. So we have like orange peel walls, which is very popular here in Florida. Super annoying if you're trying to do any sort of finishing work because they're bumpy. So the boards just did not, the MDF boards just did not want to sit. And there we do our high five when we finish something. So anyways, my husband went and created these batten pieces, I guess is what these thinner trim pieces are, and he cut them down out of MDF. So he got a sheet of MDF and he cut the board part is the thin MDF just to make the wall not orange peel behind it. And now that I'm done with this, I appreciate that we did it. Initially, I was thinking we could just do the board, or we could just do the battens and not the boards, and I could just paint the whole thing one color and make it look like it was one piece, but I'm glad we did it this way instead, because I have seen the fake board and batten done right on the orange peel wall, and it just doesn't look as good. This looks much more finished. So I really appreciate that my husband did the extra work and convinced me to buy the MDF boards to put behind everything. I am not sure of what the final cost of all of this will be yet because we're not quite done. I'm gonna project that the entire thing was less than $600 and that will include art, but I'm not positive. So, what we're gonna be doing, what we're doing here is I'm just holding a trim piece for my husband, and he is putting that, since this opens into a hallway. That hallway there that I happen to be standing in opens to a 2 bedrooms with a Jack and Jill bathroom between them. And the one bedroom we use as our library / downstairs office, and the other bedroom is my son's bedroom, and then there's the guest bathroom in between the two. And I wasn't real positive on how we were going to trim out the board and batten so that it made sense on that wall. And all we did was just use a piece of quarter round essentially as a little trim piece, like a Craftsman quarter round. And that then we put there on the end, and I painted it to match the board and batten, so it doesn't look out of place. Initially, I was thinking we could just put another board there, but when we did that, it looked strange. And so this was a way to finish that edge and not, I don't know, and make it make sense, I guess. So here we're just going ahead and installing the rest of the board and batten, and my husband is making sure that everything is level. There was probably an easier way to do this. I have seen lots of DIY board and batten videos on YouTube and perusing through Pinterest, and there were just lots and lots of easy ways to do it. But I trusted my husband here to make it work and to make it pretty, and he did. So even though there might have been faster ways to get this done, I'm glad that we took the time to just do everything very well, because in the end, I'm really, really happy with the finished product, or the almost finished product, I should say. So that was me putting the board up against the light switch and flicking the lights on and off. So right there in the front of the hallway, we have a 3 gangway light switch that controls 2 lights outside and the hallway light inside. And one of my biggest issues with this hallway is that it's only got that one light hanging there, and it's a big, long hallway. I think I mentioned this hallway is 16 feet long, and the light kind of just gets swallowed up in it at night. So I definitely want to add more lighting. I wasn't sure if I wanted to do another pendant light and move that one, because that one's kind of in the middle of the hallway, or if I wanted to do some layered lighting instead. And I think I have settled on doing layered lighting. I bought some gallery lights for the walls, and we'll see. We haven't installed them yet. That's going to be a project because my husband's going to have to go up and rewire some light switches, and have to go up in the attic and pull wiring down and drill holes, and it'll be a thing. He doesn't think it'll be that difficult. He has rewired our master bath so that I could hang a chandelier in it, a small chandelier in it. And I trust him to do all that. He's done that for ceiling fans in rooms where we didn't have a big enough light box for ceiling fans or whatever. So he's pretty handy and he can do all that. But it just takes time. And since he works a lot, he's a very hard worker. Since he works a lot, it's got to be where he's not at work, and so that means weekends, and he works a lot of weekends, so that means the limited weekends that he's not working, and here lately that's just not been all that often. So we are then talking about putting this final plank on. Oh, excuse me. It was a very hard, long night last night. I just did not sleep very well. And so, as you can see, there's a cutout there because there is a light switch panel behind that particular piece of MDF. So I believe he took his oscillating saw and cut out the shape for the new light box. I don't know what they call it. I think he calls it a gang box, but I'm not sure that that's what it's called. That's just what I'm thinking. And he's just nailing, he's using a brad nailer to nail, or a pin nailer, I'm not sure. No, that must be a brad nailer. I don't think he has a pin nailer yet. He wants to get one before we start the next phase of this project, which will be in an upcoming video. And he's just brad nailing those batten pieces, I think those trim pieces, down to the wall, and then wiping them off, because I am going to start caulking the edges of everything to give it a really seamless look before I do primer and paint. And in my head, I thought that the caulking, the primer, and the paint could all get done basically at the same time. I don't know why I thought that, because the caulking needed to dry for about 30 minutes before I could sand it. Or the filling, so here I am filling all the little nail holes with some spackle. I got this spackle at Home Depot. Typically, I get it in a can, like a tub, but what I have noticed is that when I get spackle in a tub, I never use all of it. And once you open a tub of spackle, it just does not seal airtight again. And so over time, the air just gets to it and it dries up, and I end up throwing away an entire tub of spackle. So I got this tube of spackling, and this worked really, really well to fill all the little nail holes. And so I am filling all the nail holes, and then I am using a little, oh, what do they call this? Putty knife, I think. Again, I'm not great with tools, so I'm using a little putty knife or something to go and smooth that all out and make sure that all the nail holes are actually overfilled, so that when I sand, I will sand it flat to the face of the board and batten. And this did not take real long, but what I did find is that I had a really hard time squeezing the tube of spackle. So eventually my husband did come and do it for me. I have had a reconstructive elbow surgery and a reconstructive wrist surgery, so I just don't have really strong arms. And I have a really hard time with grip strength, which is something that I could be working on, but I'm not. So eventually it just got to the point where I couldn't really squeeze the tube very well anymore, and so my husband comes and helps me with that, and then this process goes really fast after that, because he does the hole filling and then I do the smoothing out with the putty knife. And then after that, I had to wait probably about 30 minutes or so for everything to dry, and then I could go over it and sand it down. And then once it was sanded, I had to wipe everything down to get all the sand and dust off of everything, and then I could start priming it. And like I said, I thought that this process was just going to take a few hours, and I was so wrong. Maybe it would have only taken a few hours if I had just like trucked through it, but we had multiple things happening here. I had, I think, bread going in the oven. We had that evening we had to take my son to a birthday party. There was just like, there was a lot of things happening that I just had to keep stopping and starting and stopping and starting. And maybe if I could have just dedicated like an entire day to just doing this project, I could have gotten it done in the day. But even then, I wonder if I could have trucked through it like that, because there was just so many things going on. And that's how projects go here. I don't know if anybody else's house is like that, but it's like I have too much to do, and I don't have time to just be focusing on one thing like the hallway when I've got like 8 other things that also need to be attended to. And probably every single mom watching this knows exactly what I'm talking about. So anyways, once I get all these nail holes filled, and I really do suggest that if you're going to take on a project like this, go through the steps of making sure that you do the little detail work, like filling the nail holes, like doing the sanding, like doing the caulking, all those different things, because your end product is going to be so much nicer just because you paid attention to all those little details. I know it's annoying and tedious and kind of a pain and takes a long time and yada, yada, yada. But the end result is so, so much nicer. And I know that I have done this before where I have skipped steps. Like I didn't want to prime the cabinet doors that I painted. And then, 2 years later, the paint is all flaking and peeling and falling off. And had I just taken the extra couple days to do the right kind of sanding and the right kind of priming, our cabinet doors would still look brand new. So it's just a matter of like long-term gain versus short-term pain. So I couldn't get the caulk gun to work, so I was like asking my husband, how do I get this to work correctly? I have used it before because I did all the baseboards in the whole house, so he installed them, then I filled and caulked and painted them, but I couldn't get it to work properly, so he had to come over and like take a look at it. It was completely user error, by the way. So I'm just going now and I am caulking all of the seams. So where the board and batten meets each other, where everything meets the baseboard, and where everything meets the edges of the walls. I am just filling with some, I think it's Alex Plus. It's the paintable caulk. One tube did basically everything in the hallway here. So it was more than enough, and I think it was not very expensive, maybe $6 or something like that. And we got that at Home Depot, and we had used this same paintable caulk on all of the baseboards throughout the whole house, and it did paint really well, and it's held up over several cleanings and beatings and things like that. So I would recommend it to you. And it doesn't dry super fast, so that process, I want to say that it needed 60 minutes to dry before you could paint on it, but I already knew that I wasn't going to be painting this evening because of how slow everything else had gone. So you like notice this was several days, so every time my outfit changes, it's actually a different day. I do not change my outfit multiple times a day. And you'll also notice that I am just wearing my whatever painting clothes, and I usually look homeless, and I don't care. This is real life. I am not an influencer. I am not trying to impress anybody with my cute hair or cute clothes or cute dressing skills, because that's not who I am. I am just a normal, everyday mom and housewife and daughter of Christ. So this is how I am. But yeah, so I say all that to say that I have a wet washcloth here in my hand, and what I'm doing is I'm actually using my fingers, getting them wet, and then I use that to smooth out the caulk, because when it comes out of the tip of the gun, it's kind of bubbly and not real even. Like it goes on pretty evenly. You can see I'm not having to like stop and reapply it or anything like that. But I want it to fill in that whole space, and so in order to do that, I just use my fingers to do that. But in this particular video, my fingernails were super long, and I did not realize that having long fingernails was actually going to basically ruin the way that the caulk looked when I went to go smush it in with my fingers. So my husband found me this little like caulking tool, and it worked okay, but actually what worked better was when I just went and cut my fingernails and then came back with a shorter fingernail. Just not something that I had thought about prior to doing this. And so there I'm just caulking the trim piece onto the wall and making sure that that edge is really seamless too. Another great thing about doing this is because we have those textured walls, when I go to cut in with the paint, it makes it really easy to cut in nice and even, instead of having to worry about, because you're painting on that caulk, you're not painting on the orange peel wall, on the textured wall, which just makes cutting in an absolute nightmare. It's just horrible to cut in trim paint on textured paint, because no matter how steady your hand is, it's never going to look professionally cut in. It's just going to be kind of lumpy and bumpy. But doing it on caulk like this, it's very easy to get a super straight, super smooth trim line that I really appreciate. So I painted basically our entire home. I did get some help from people here and there, but for the most part, I did, like, I would say like 95% of all the painting in the house on the interior and the baseboards. Now, this is the next day after I caulked everything. I cleaned up and went to bed, and now here I am getting ready to do the priming, and it was kind of chilly that morning. I know, haha, I live in Florida. How could it be chilly? But it actually was. We don't ever turn our heat on. We're stubborn like that. So here I am just going in and putting in the trim. I'm doing all the edges with the paintbrush. And if I could do this over again, and I eventually actually do get to this point after I realize my mistake, what I would do is I would immediately go over those paintbrush strokes with a paint roller. And eventually I realized that those paint strokes are actually drying, and they are showing through the finished product. And so one panel or two panels kind of look not as nice as the rest of the panels. In the overall, you can't tell unless I point it out, I don't think. But I can see it, and so it's annoying to me. And so if you're going to do this, I would highly recommend that after you cut in your primer or your paint, that you go immediately back over it with a paint roller to smooth out those brush strokes if that annoys you. It does annoy me to see brush strokes on something that's supposed to be flat. Whew. I'm so sorry. I may edit those yawns out, but I probably won't because this is real life. There was not enough coffee in the world this morning. So I think I speed this part of the video up because painting is boring. There's not much to explain other than before I did the priming here. Oh, highly recommend a primer. Get a primer. Even if you're painting on white, still prime, because the MDF sucked up this primer like mad. And we chose a dark enough paint color that I probably could have painted over this brown and it wouldn't have been a problem. But had I painted with the paint that we chose on the MDF, I think it would have taken 2 whole cans, and I'm not exaggerating. This MDF just drank that primer in like crazy. I was so, I don't know, impressed if that's the right word, but the MDF just sucked up the primer. I had to do 2 or 3 coats of primer in some areas. I was kind of only expecting to have to do 1 coat of primer because we didn't put a light color on the wall, so I wasn't too worried about like getting an even coat or an even color or anything. I knew that the paint that we chose would cover up whatever was behind it, but it was more because the MDF was so porous and it just took in so much paint that it kind of would have been a waste for me to buy. And I'm a big fan of getting a very nice paint. Like, I'm not saying get the most expensive paint you can, but get the nicest paint that you can afford. Don't go for the cheap stuff because you will end up paying for it in the long run. I almost always go for an eggshell or a semi-gloss or a satin, something like that. Something that is highly durable and highly washable. So this primer is just, I think, a Valspar primer from Lowe's. The paint that we eventually end up putting on the walls here is a Sherwin-Williams color called Dried Thyme, which you'll see coming up. I'm also making sure when I'm doing this priming that I'm getting all those edges really, really well. And like I said, what I wish I would have done is I wish I would have immediately gone over this all with a paint roller so you couldn't see the brush strokes, but it is what it is. I learned eventually. And then I do end up having to go back over all of this yet again because the MDF just sucked in so much primer and there were some spots where you could definitely see the wood straight through it. So I wasn't looking for a necessarily even coat when I was doing the primer. I was just looking for something where it was covering up most of the brown and there weren't thirsty spots either. So also what I kind of, I guess, discovered was that this particular primer had a coloring to it, which I guess I didn't realize. I assumed it was just sort of white, but it wasn't. It had a gray sort of tinge to it. And so if I didn't stir it every couple of uses, then it started to separate. And I don't know if that's normal for primer or if this was just this primer. I've never noticed that in a primer before. And so when I was applying it, I did notice that some areas appeared a little gray, whereas other areas appeared more white. And that was when the paint started, or the primer started to separate. And so I would have to go and shake it back up and stir it and make sure that it wasn't separating. And I just have never noticed that with paint. And I suppose I assumed that primer and paint were similar enough, but I guess they are not. And that may be my own ignorance showing, and that's fine. I don't know everything about anything. So, but using the primer, I think, really did cut down on the amount of paint that we used, and it also made the paint apply very smoothly. And so highly recommend doing the primer. I'm not paying real careful attention to where I'm putting the primer at because I am going to be repainting these baseboards. And since I had to fill the nail holes in the reattachment of the baseboards, and because we reused the baseboards, there was no sense in putting in new ones. We had old ones that were perfectly fine. They just needed to be touched up. So since I was going to be touching up the baseboards anyway, I wasn't real careful about applying paint on them or anything like that because I knew that I was going to have to redo them all. And at this point in time, I was kind of looking at the baseboards and wondering if maybe I wasn't going to paint them the same color as the walls of the dried time. So I was kind of flopping back and forth between how exactly I wanted this project to look in the end. And we had gone and we had priced beadboard versus board and batten. And don't quote me on this, but I want to say that the beadboard was maybe $40 or $50 for a sheet, and we were going to need several sheets because this hallway is so long. And then the MDF was like less than half the price of beadboard. And so although I did like the way the beadboard looked, I also was kind of torn with how narrow the slats in the beadboard were, and I was thinking that that might make the hallway look even longer. And I thought that maybe the board and batten having those wider spaces in between it would make the hallway look a little less wide. And I think or a little less long, and I think that actually did work. I think that the optical illusion made the hallway feel shorter. We'll see in the end here if you agree or not. But I now am doing the rolling on the primer, and this is just a synthetic roller. And what I realized was that as I was doing that primer there in the roller, with the roller, the paint strokes from that very first fill-in of prime had already dried. And I was like irritated because I was like, oh no, this is going to show right through in the paint. And I kept trying to go back over those paint strokes thinking maybe I could even them out. But no, they dried really, really fast. And so if you're going to use a primer, here's your next tip. Make sure that you do the rolling immediately after you do the brushing, because I was so disappointed when I realized that those paint strokes were there. And you know what I could have done? I could have stopped and gotten the sander or some sandpaper, and I could have sanded those paint strokes out of the wood or out of the MDF. But then I was thinking the MDF doesn't sand very fantastically, and I think that this will just make a bigger mess than what it's worth, and that I can live with the paint strokes, but I can't live with messy, fuzzy looking MDF from trying to sand it. So paint strokes it was. I do this. I just give each of the boards and the battens a coat of the primer with the roller to even out the paint. And then I realized a little bit later that if I actually did this step immediately, like if I did the paint brush first and then immediately before the paint dried, before moving on to the next panel, went over it with the roller just to even the paintbrush strokes out, that I was going to end up with a much nicer looking finished product. And so you may see that. I don't know if I cut that part out of this video or not, because I knew this video was getting so long. But I mean, we're on like day 4 now of this project. And so this was actually the day, I think I talked about this in my last hallway renovation video, that this was the day that my sister's friends came over who needed their brakes worked on their car. And so I was busy doing this while my husband was teaching the boyfriend how to fix the brakes on their car. And so like I was not kidding when I said I looked like a hobo, and there was paint everywhere. And the night before, I had actually spilled a bunch of paint on the floor, or maybe it was this same day. I think actually this same day I spilled a bunch of primer on the floor, and it had seeped through those drop cloths. I bought these drop cloths. I bought probably off Amazon like 2 or 3 years ago, and they're washable. They're huge. There's 2 of them there. They're huge. I think 20 by 20 maybe. And when I get done painting, I just go throw them straight in the wash. And they wash nicely. They dry nicely. I have no complaints. They weren't super expensive. If I could remember the brand, I would tell you, but I don't. I think it's like cotton drop cloths or something like that. I'm happy with them. Once they're dry, we fold them up and we stick them in storage. And then every time I have a painting project, they come back out. So like you'll see here, I'm not concerned with having even coating or even brush strokes or anything. This is just the first layer of paint. What I am trying to do though, is I am trying to get those brush strokes out of the MDF, and I think it's like about here that I realized that if I just got to it before the paint dried, that's possible. So I kind of stopped using the brush. What I was going to do was just brush all the cracks and crevices and everything, and then come back around with the roller and try to, like, you know, be systematic about everything. But that's not what happened. I ended up having to switch back and forth between the two, and I realized that the finished product just looked so much nicer. You can see me looking here at the brush things, and my husband's standing there in the hallway, and he's telling me, "Oh, you know, if you do that while he's so funny, because he'll be like, "Oh, well, how critical am I allowed to be?" And I'm like, "Unless you're doing the painting, you're not allowed to be critical." He was like, "Okay, point taken." No, I really value his opinion and his feedback on everything. It's just that this was a lot of work, and I was really underprepared for the amount of work that this was going to take. All right, so as you'll see here, it is the next day. I actually have everything primed, and I am starting to go ahead and put on the true color, which is, again, Sherwin-Williams Dried Thyme. And I am so obsessed with this color and how pretty it is and how warm and cozy it makes the hallway feel. I'm just absolutely in love with this color. When I had color samples sitting on the wall for a couple days trying to decide which one, I had initially went with, I think maybe it was Evergreen Fog, but it was the color that was a shade or 2 lighter than this one. And the more I was looking at it, the more I felt that this would actually be a better choice because of how large this hallway is. The other one was just a tad too light. I thought it might compete with the gray walls, and I wanted something that kind of melted and reflected just how cozy I want the house to feel. So definitely obsessed with this color. I couldn't find a whole lot about like people using it in entries and stuff online or in Pinterest inspiration photos. So I did find some like sage green and olive green inspiration pictures, but nothing in this particular color. But go check this color out. It's Sherwin-Williams Dried Thyme. So pretty. Absolutely obsessed. So I had, by this point in time, decided that I was going to paint the baseboards to match this color, and you'll see right away I am fixing my mistake, right? Like I did the trim, the edging, and immediately I picked the paint roller up and went and smoothed over those paint lines. So at least my final 2 coats of paint did not have any paint strokes or drips in them. And I had to switch the camera angle to this wall because of the way the sunlight was coming in. So it's kind of a weird camera angle since you can see partly into the kitchen, since after you get out of that hallway, you walk straight into our open concept. It's kind of a strange layout, but it's fine. And you'll see that I do kind of this V motion with the roller to fill in the white space. And then also I am just trying to get any drips off the wall before they start to dry. This process took, from start to finish, I think 7 days. From the time we started until the time we actually finished the hallway, to the point where I could get art hung up and whatnot, I think it was 7 days. And it just, like I said, I think it could have gone faster if I didn't have life happening and if I could have just devoted my entire time to this project. But that is how things go around here, and that is fine. I have time. I don't mind if there's unfinished things happening around, because that's how we are in life. We are also a project, and God is not done with us at any given point in time until he calls us home. So I'm okay with it. So yeah, I just bought, I think maybe a 4-pack of these synthetic rollers, just in case. I thought initially I was going to try to wash and dry and reuse rollers, but I'm glad I didn't. They weren't that expensive, and it was so much easier just to pull the dirty one off the roller and switch to a clean one and keep going. It just was so much faster. So yeah, I'm just so in love with the finished project, which you guys won't be able to see in this video because this video does not even finish with the finished look. I had to order some art off Etsy after we got done installing the shelves and the hooks. My husband is building a bench for the entryway on the left-hand side, a shallow bench. So none of that has been done yet. Well, I did order the art, the shelves are installed, but the bench is not yet built. And again, that's just because the only time he has to build is basically Sunday afternoons. So if we have anything planned for Sunday afternoons, that's a day where he cannot be productive at home because he's out being productive in the world every other day. So thank God for good husbands, right? So anyways, every time that I go back over this, I'm just being sure that I blend in all of those paint strokes so that the finished look is super, super smooth. And this worked really, really well. I wish I would have figured that out before I did the primer. I suppose I could have done some more research on YouTube University, but I did not. So this was a learning process. Now I have the knowledge necessary to do the dining room, which I had already wanted to do in either picture frame molding or board and batten. I just wasn't quite sure, since it is an open concept living space. I wasn't sure how to do this and end it in the dining room because I didn't want this look to continue throughout the rest of the living space because it's open concept. And the walls are kind of angled oddly in the kitchen with that pantry, and we have bullnose corners, which means they're rounded corners. Such a pain in the butt. I wish we just had normal straight corners. It was so hard to trim around them with the baseboards. My husband had to cut all these experimental little pieces to try and find the right angle, and it was just a pain. I know it's supposed to be considered higher end. I don't consider it higher end. I don't care if my corners in my home are rounded or squared, and I would prefer them to be squared just for simplicity's sake. But anyhow, I am just, the more I put this paint on the wall, the happier I'm becoming with my choice to go with this darker color, because it is so pretty. So I think I wrap this video up here in just a little bit, where I just kind of speed through and finish painting the rest of this wall. And then I don't know if I end with the picture of the top cap, the boards that I had stained earlier up on here. But if I don't, that'll be in part 3, where we actually do show the final finished project, because that is, I have some video recorded for that, but I'm gonna have to wait until my husband starts building the bench, and I'm not sure when that's going to be, because that just depends on his schedule. So anyhow, thank you guys so much for coming along with this project. I know this has been a long video. I hope that it's helpful to somebody if you're looking at doing something like this on in your own home. Just like being aware of the different steps that are involved, being aware of the multiple things that you're going to need to purchase and how to plan for it. And then also just being aware like how long it's going to take. And not to be discouraged if it doesn't look like a YouTube video, you know, while you're doing it. Like, you can't fast forward through real life. You actually have to take the time to do it. So, I love you guys. Again, thank you so much to the many new subscribers. This has been a wild ride. I appreciate the comments and the likes, but the best thing you can do to help my channel is to share this content, any of the content, with a friend if you think they would find it helpful, educational, or edifying. And I really appreciate you guys. Again, Solo Deo Gloria. I hope that you guys are having a fabulous week. And I hope that you find time to get out there and fellowship with your people and continue to do the work for the Lord. All the glory. Bye.